Good evening. Thank you for that very kind introduction, Mr. Ambassador. And it is so good to be back in Israel and see so many friends. And particularly, I'm grateful to General Yadlin for inviting me. He was a wonderful colleague when I was in government, and I am so pleased to see his leadership being put to such good use now here at INSS. And just looking at the agenda, it speaks to his sense of what's really important to address for Israel's national security. And given this assemblage of people, it speaks to the quality of people he's able to draw together. I wanted to touch on the conference title because I think it's really apt at this moment in time, and give you my bottom line up front. Israel does, in fact, face unprecedented challenges and dynamic and daunting ones, but there are strategic opportunities out there in the mid to longer term that we together, U.S. and Israel, must identify and seize in order to strengthen Israel's security and its position at this time of challenge and change. The U.S. commitment to Israel, as you know, is unbreakable and unshakable. And I think that commitment can help Israel seize some of these opportunities in a number of areas. And I'm going to touch on 4 specific areas tonight in managing in working through the implications of the Arab Spring, with regard to the peace process, with regard to reconciliation with Turkey, and with regard to Iran. In my view, if we fail to seize these opportunities, there will be dire consequences for Israel, certainly, but also for the United States and for our shared interests. So tonight I'd like to offer you a view from Washington. It is no longer the official view, but an American perspective on these issues. Now, there are many here tonight that are more expert than I in the revolutions that are sweeping across this region and the particular dynamics within countries ranging from Tunisia to Egypt to Syria to Yemen. So I'd like to take a more strategic perspective and step back and highlight 4 overarching trends that I see that are playing out in different ways in different countries at this time of change. First, we have entered a period of profound political instability that I think is likely to continue for many years. Over the past 18 months, we have seen regimes fall in Tunisia and Egypt and Libya and Yemen, and we've seen continued, I would say, shaking of the foundations of regimes in Syria and Bahrain. The internal challenges that these states face are truly enormous. Numerous other regimes, from Saudi Arabia to Jordan to Morocco, UAE, Kuwait, they have also been experiencing popular protests and unrest. And Jordan, a key ally of the United States and Israel, seems primed for greater instability in 2012, having had 3 different prime ministers in less than a year and a half. The second trend that we see is a political Islam on the rise. In Tunisia and Egypt, Islamist parties have emerged as the dominant players in parliaments. We don't know yet who is going to win Egypt's runoff elections, but we do know that the Muslim Brotherhood is very well organized and positioned for the race. In Libya and Syria, we have seen militant groups also wrapping themselves in the Islamist agenda. In Morocco and Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, Islamist political parties have become highly visible features in the political landscape. So political Islam is a force that we must contend with going forward. What's interesting to me, however, is how quickly some of these Islamists, including some hardline groups that have traditionally disdained democracy, how quickly they've had to adjust to accommodate themselves to new democratic realities. It's important for us to remember these groups are not monolithic. The agendas of Islamist parties range from the relatively moderate to the quite extreme. In Egypt, for example, there are very important differences between some of the more moderate Muslim Brotherhood elements and the ultra-conservative Salafists. So I think that we need to watch these groups. We need to better understand them over time. We also need to be mindful that as some of these groups transition from being opposition parties into being responsible for governance and accountable to the populations that elected them to meet their basic needs, that may continue to make their positions evolve over time. The third big trend I'd like to highlight is that in the age of Al Jazeera, Facebook, Twitter, we now see a much more savvy, a more vocal, and a more empowered body politic in most Arab countries. Regimes no longer have a monopoly on information. The internet, 24/7 satellite news challenges, these have all given voice to the Arab street, allowing them to express their views, their aspirations, and their grievances in ways that are truly unprecedented. This is particularly true for Arab youth, who I think experience a great gap between what they see through global communications on the internet and what they experience in their daily lives. The fourth trend I want to highlight is perhaps the greatest long-term challenge in the region, and that is the economic challenges, the economic state of affairs in many of these countries. The 2009 UN Arab Human Development Report noted that in most Arab countries, large segments of the population are becoming increasingly marginalized due to widening inequality between haves and have-nots, deepening unemployment, particularly among the younger generation, rampant corruption in both the public and private sector, and lack of basic rights and meaningful economic participation for women, who are usually half of the population or so. Recently, the political instability has made these economic conditions only worse, as these countries have seen the flight of foreign capital, the plummeting of tourism, and so forth. So these newly elected governments are going to have to grapple with some very tough challenges, and we'll have to put some very difficult to swallow reforms in place to foster sustainable economic growth. So when you think about those four trends, where they lead is very unpredictable. It's clearly unknown. And I think the INSS did a very nice paper on this, and it said, you know, really the outcomes range from the perilous, which would include things like the emergence of radical Islamist regimes, the weakening of central authority in a way that enables more terrorism. So it ranges from those perilous outcomes to the promising, such as the potential weakening of the Iran-Syria-Hezbollah axis, the emergence of more moderate Islamist regimes that are really focused on meeting the needs of their populations and therefore become stakeholders in the stability of the region. So in face of this uncertainty and given these stakes, the question is, what should Israel be doing? What should the United States be doing together with Israel? And I would argue this situation forces us to rethink our priorities, to think about how can we, through our actions, shape some of the choices of these new emerging governments. How do we safeguard Israel's security and well-being in this time of change? How do we reestablish some sense of regional stability favorable to our interests? So I'd like to nominate for your consideration a handful of priorities for us together going forward. The first is, I think we have to support the reform process. The only real road back to stability is through continued political and economic reform. There is no turning back the clock to what we knew and what was comfortable. We have to try to support Arab countries, Arab regimes, improving their ability to be more responsive to the needs of their populations and to gradually get them to buy in to being responsible stakeholders in the peace and security of the region. Secondly, we need to seek to engage these new civilian leaders much more intensively. We need to better understand their agendas for governing, identify common interests where we have them, moderate their impulses to perhaps adopt more extreme positions that may not be in concert with our interests, and so forth. Obviously, this will be the work of our diplomatic, our security, our intelligence communities, but I also think, importantly for this conference to think about, there is room for track 2 and track 1.5, if you will, dialogues, bringing together non-official but still very influential players from various countries and America and Israel together to talk about some of these choices that Arab leaders are facing and some of the implications and trade-offs if those choices are made in detrimental ways. This could be done bilaterally, trilaterally, but I think that's something we should explore. The third priority, and these are not in any particular order, so this is probably actually should be number one, is that we need to give real priority to ensuring that Egypt and Jordan, whatever happens in the future, continue to uphold their commitments to peace with Israel. While bashing the peace treaties may sometimes be tempting political rhetoric for some parties, appealing to populist sentiments, actually abrogating these treaties or failing to implement them would be disastrous for all parties, not just Israel. So I think the United States and Israel must engage with new leaders to help them understand the importance and that it's in their interest to continue to abide by these commitments. And the U.S., for its part, should be willing to use our leverage, whether it's our security cooperation programs, our influence with regard to international financial institutions and the assistance packages they put together. We need to be prepared to use our influence to ensure that these countries understand keeping the peace and keeping their obligations to peace is a requirement for their support. The fourth priority I would highlight, and that is the importance of working with whatever leadership emerges in Egypt to put new mechanisms in place to ensure that we prevent tactical incidents on the border from escalating into strategic crises. I know that there are Israeli engagements with the Egyptian military and their intelligence counterparts, and those should continue. They're very important, but they are not enough. Despite some concerns over recent rhetoric, I think I would encourage Israel to engage with Egypt's new civilian leadership at the highest levels. This is the only way to ensure that peace is maintained in the future. And we need to be encouraging this new leadership in Egypt, whatever their stripes, to deal with the situation, the threats in the Sinai, and to keep the peace with Israel. But now I'd like to also suggest that if you step back and look more strategically and more long-term, there's an even more important step that Israel could take to seize an opportunity and shape its strategic environment, and that is relaunching a viable Israeli-Palestinian peace process that would lead towards a two-state solution that would guarantee the existence of Israel as a democratic and Jewish state. We don't know yet what course the Arab Spring will take, but we do know one thing, as I mentioned: the Arab street is more empowered than ever. And Arab politicians, whether they're running for office in free elections, whether they're trying to push for gradual reform, or whether they're simply trying to survive and avoid revolution, they will have to take the views of their publics into greater account. In this context, whether the peace process is stalled, dead, or alive and well, and moving forward, will have a very significant impact on those sentiments in the Arab street and on what these newly elected Arab leaders feel they have to do. It will also determine the degree to which these governments can use the lack of progress towards peace with the Palestinians to divert their public anger that's really focused on economic and internal conditions, but could divert that anger over largely domestic issues to focus on Israel instead. So I believe strongly it is in Israel's interest to short-circuit that dynamic, and the best way to do that is to restart a viable process towards peace. Now, I read with interest from being in Washington the statements of Prime Minister Netanyahu and Kadima leader Mufaz, and I noted that the peace process was highlighted among the coalition government's top 4 priorities. With the largest parliamentary majority in Israel's history, surely this government can afford to seriously pursue policies that would lead to a two-state solution and do more to improve Israel's strategic security than just about anything else I can imagine. Now, I understand how difficult this is, particularly in current circumstances, when we have the Palestinians are divided between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas that doesn't even recognize Israel's right to exist, where we have fundamental differences over the outlines of what peace would look like, what an agreement would look like, when we've had the recent PA gambit at the UN seeking to end-run the process. But the absence of a viable peace process hurts Israel in many ways. It makes Israel seem like the bad guy on the international stage, and it gives ammunition to those that would seek to delegitimize Israel and weaken this very support that you need from the international community more than ever at this critical time. It deprives, even more importantly, it deprives the Israeli people of a path towards their historic dream. The only end state that, in my view, will guarantee Israel's existence, its security, its prosperity for the long term, and that is a two-state solution with a democratic Jewish state of Israel recognized by the international community. And from what I understand, the changing demographics in Israel means that there's really no time to lose to be pursuing that objective with all of our energy. Lastly, a peace process, I believe, would also increase our collective leverage to ensure that other parties also make good on their commitments to peace. If we are doing our part, Israel and the United States together, surely Egypt and Jordan would have to be held accountable to do theirs. So I'd like to turn now to the third topic that I mentioned, and that is reconciliation with Turkey. This is a really important opportunity for Israel to repair its relationship with Turkey. Turkey has emerged in the region as one of the strongest and most influential voices. It remains a close and valued NATO ally for the United States, and I believe it does share our interest in preventing Iran from becoming a nuclear weapon state. Now again, I understand that past events have made concrete steps towards reconciliation quite difficult. But if there's ever a time for Israel to rise above past differences and recriminations with Turkey, now is that time. Israel must act more strategically, and I think there's a tremendous opportunity to rebuild its partnership with Turkey and with other partners where it can. This is really important at a time of such uncertainty. So I want to applaud the INS's work on this issue. I think your paper said it just about right in its recommendations. I want to turn now to say a brief word about the challenge of Iran. First and foremost, I want to be absolutely crystal clear. The United States and Israel share the exact same objective with regard to Iran, and that is preventing Iran from acquiring or developing nuclear weapons. President Obama has been very clear on this point. When it comes to preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, he will take no options off the table. In a widely read interview that he did with journalist Jeffrey Goldberg in March, he was very clear that he doesn't bluff. And I can tell you from personal experience dealing with this president that he is a president who says what he means and then does what he says. Moreover, we've heard from Secretary of Defense Panetta on numerous occasions that the development of a nuclear weapon by Iran is a red line for the United States. General Dempsey, the chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, has been very clear publicly that we have developed a viable contingency plan for Iran. And so again, when the President said all options are on the table, let me reassure you that those options are real and viable. U.S. strategy, though, on Iran encompasses all dimensions of our power. There's a political effort aimed at isolating Iran. There is a diplomatic effort aimed at building and strengthening the international coalition and exploring whether negotiations can reduce the risks to us. There's an economic effort that's imposed the most crippling sanctions ever experienced by any country in history, and it's about to get worse. And then, yes, there is a military effort to ensure that we are prepared for any contingency. And having sat in the Pentagon and spent a lot of my time on this issue, I can assure you of the quality of that work. Iran's leaders should understand that we do not have a policy of containment or deterrence. The United States has a policy to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. And this president will not hesitate to use force when it is necessary to defend the United States and its interests. And I think we can point to the Osama bin Laden raid, the Libya intervention, the surge in Afghanistan, so many examples when he's been willing to make the hard call when the use of force was appropriate. So I agree with the INSS paper, excellent paper's assessment that without a credible military option, the likelihood of successfully enlisting the nations of the world in sanctions and bringing the Iranians to understand that it is in their own best interest to reach an agreement is lower. I think we all share that assessment, and that is informing our strategy. This is exactly why President Obama has kept the options on the table and has taken steps to make it real. I want to highlight that the INSS paper that was distributed for this conference also makes a very important other point, and that is that any military strike, whoever may prosecute it, will only delay, not destroy, Iran's nuclear program. American estimates suggest a delay of 1 to 3 years for an Israeli strike. Some Israeli estimates may be more optimistic. But in any case, it is something that would buy us time. It would put time back on the clock, but it would not, by itself, solve the problem in any enduring way. And so following such a strike, were it to happen, the INSS paper rightly points out that we need to make sure that at that point in time, the day after, if you will, we could see the international community still being prepared to continue a much longer-term campaign to continue to isolate Iran and prevent the regime from rebuilding its nuclear program. This would likely require diplomatic pressure, efforts to block technology and material transfers, perhaps further sanctions, perhaps further action is necessary. And none of this is the important point, none of this would be possible unless a significant portion of the international community remains on board, meaning they supported a strike when it occurred. Because if they don't, it will be impossible to hold together the kind of international campaign and the kind of international coalition you would need post-strike to truly make good on the goal of prevention. And that is a really tough challenge for all of us, and I hope that we will wrestle with it tomorrow. So here's the rub. If Israel or any other country were to launch a unilateral strike against Iran's nuclear program prematurely, before all other options to stop Iran have been tried and failed, it would undermine the legitimacy of the action in the eyes of the broader international community, and would, most importantly, undermine the ability of the international community to come together, to unify for this critical, longer-term campaign. So it would ultimately hurt our chances of reaching our goal, which is to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. So again, I wanted to be very plain-spoken now that I'm out of office. I wanted to provoke, I hope, a healthy discussion tomorrow at our session. And so I just leave that idea with you. And I think it argues strongly at this point for continuing to tighten the sanctions, for continuing to pursue negotiations to the extent they are fruitful, and to give ourselves a little bit more time to pursue these avenues. So in conclusion, I want to suggest that in order for us to be able to take any of the steps that I've outlined here tonight, it's absolutely imperative that we ensure the U.S.-Israel relationship remains as strong as possible. As I said in my opening, the U.S. commitment to Israel's security has been unshakable and unbreakable. It is a pillar, a central pillar of American foreign policy across numerous Democratic and Republican administrations since the State of Israel's founding. The Obama administration, for its part, has taken this commitment very seriously, taking unprecedented steps to shore up Israel's qualitative military edge, deepening our close military and intelligence cooperation, increasing U.S. assistance to Israel to adapt to new threats, funding systems like Iron Dome and so forth. Indeed, as Minister Barak told Secretary Gates in their last meeting together in Washington, he said, "This administration has done more to safeguard Israel's security than any other he could remember." Now, I know this isn't widely recognized, but having spent hours, days, weeks, months working these issues on the American side, I can personally assure you that I believe it to be true. We understand that Israel must always have the ability to defend itself by itself against any threat. We understand that. But at the end of the day, Israel should never forget that the United States is its ally and that we are stronger together. And as President Obama recently said, we do have your back. This is true today. I believe it will be true tomorrow, whatever the outcome of our elections. And even as the United States begins to emerge from a decade of war in the Middle East, as we turn more of our strategic attention to the Asia-Pacific region, which is so critical to the global economy, I want to assure you we are not going to walk away from or turn our back on this critical region, the Middle East, or on our closest ally here, Israel. We are bound together by shared interests. We are bound together by shared values, freedom, democracy, human dignity. We are bound together by the ties between our peoples and our history. So these unbreakable ties, I believe, should give us the confidence to have candid, forthright conversations with each other at conferences like this. But ultimately, they should give us confidence that however daunting the challenges we face, we will negotiate them successfully together. So again, thank you. It's an honor to be here. I look forward to the conversation tonight and tomorrow. And thank you.